Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our newest episode of Strange Appalachia. This is another quarantine edition, although sounds like there's some states, especially in the Appalachian region, that are looking at opening back up at least on a limited basis. So that's a sort of, I guess, an encouraging quarantine edition. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit more about Mothman and some of the possible explanations for that phenomenon that have come out over the years. And I think we're going to start it up by talking about some strange news that Charlie has for us.
Yeah, following some of the Bigfoot pages that I'm on, I recently saw a pretty good track that it was a four-toed track, and the guy that found it actually it was embedded in the ground so deep and so heavy that it actually you could see the scars on the bottom of the footprint. It did look like a Bigfoot track, although to me it didn't look quite right. It looked too short. But it was a very, very interesting track. And so I saw that article, and it was pretty interesting hearing the guy talk about it. He believed that it came from an old Bigfoot, and he actually gave it a name. He called it the Old Man of the Forest. I don't know. I know a lot of the places that have these sightings and that have what they think may be a family troop of Bigfoot will name them. Of course, once again, you're talking about a creature that there's really no proof or even fossil evidence of. The second one is actually it's a pretty big deal. The Navy just released some more videos of UFOs, and they're basically saying we have no idea where these things are coming from or what's causing them. As far as disclosure goes, that's something that even 5 years ago I would never have guessed the government would be to disclose anything like that, even remotely suggesting that there's a possibility of aliens.
Right. For my 2 cents in this, I've seen the article about the UFOs and the Navy releasing that. Not got a chance to watch the videos that they've released or really see what that's all about yet. Um, but I did see those, and the Bigfoot footprint. Uh, it sounds really convincing. To me, though, four toes sort of throws the whole thing sort of into a question mark because, you would think Bigfoot, typically you're thinking five toes. So if it's deep enough and it shows enough detail, like you say, to see scars on the bottom, you would think there would be a fifth toe mark.
Well, it's one of those things that there's always an answer, and it doesn't matter how outlandish the story is. Somebody
Right.
always needs to have an answer. But in this case, he said he believed it was from inbreeding, that was a trait that was being caused by inbreeding of this population. Once again, you really need some DNA evidence or something
Right.
more than a track. And like I said, the track looked short to me. It was very wide, but it didn't seem like it was long enough. And I mean, if it is an actual track, if it's something that is real, it could be an injury. That could be why it's so short. Um, and the scar on the bottom of it, the scars that they were showing on the bottom of the foot, they were pretty deep. So, who really knows what it is? I mean, I don't, but it was a pretty interesting video to watch this guy, bring this thing out and show where he found it and everything.
Very cool. Um, I'll see if I can look that one up for our next video as well.
Yeah, and anybody out there, if you watch the Navy videos, um, it's boring. Of all things, it's boring. It's just a weird shaped craft on the horizon, and no matter how hard they try, they can't catch it. Uh, it's obviously evading them, and you got to think these are some of our most advanced fighter jets, and this thing's playing cat and mouse with it, and our advanced fighter jets don't have a chance. I don't think with the way the thing was moving, I don't think if they had launched every missile we have that any of them would have touched it.
Hmm. That's interesting. I'm definitely have to look that up and see what's going on with it, or
So
try to figure out what's going on with it. Obviously, I
Like I
probably
said,
probably won't be able to answer that question.
no, it does look pretty boring though. I mean, when you're watching them, because it is in night vision or heat vision, so you're not really getting a lot of details. But it's definitely a craft there, and the fighter jets can't touch it. So
Interesting. All right. Well, I guess that does it for sort of strange news for this episode. So, we're going to move now into Mothman. And on that note, if you haven't watched our last episode where we talked about the Mothman, you may want to go check that out first before you listen to the rest of this. I won't necessarily say there's any spoilers for it because I mean it's the Mothman legend. It's very popular, very very well known. I don't think anybody's going to be upset by not knowing what it is, but you'll sort of get some of their initial feelings and thoughts for it. And tonight we're going to talk about some of the famous explanations that are out there, the more common explanations. So if you want to hit that, we'll start into that.
the first explanations we have are basically large birds. Um, you get birds that aren't common in the area, but are known to be in the area sometimes. Um, Things like great horned owls or uh, blue herrings or what was the other bird?
Sandhill crane.
Sandhill crane, right? And of course, in the beginning, the thing wasn't called the Mothman. The thing was called the Big Bird. Um, and most often, that's how it's described. And in my opinion, that those are pretty valid. Um, I could see people getting worked up into a fuss and uh, seeing these things and then being like, "That's got to be it." Um, but the biggest explanation, the biggest thing that it came from, um, in my opinion, there's a Soldier of Fortune uh, article. Soldier of Fortune is a magazine, a military magazine, where they interview a gentleman that said that the Mothman was a halo drop trooper from Special Forces that was dropped over the area. I can remember hearing about this article, many many years ago. But then there's another show called the Ectoplasm Show, and it's a pretty good show. I recommend you guys listen to it. As long as you can handle some cussing, because they do have some foul language on there. But they were interviewing a guy named Jeff Adamek, and Jeff is a Special Forces. He's Green Beret, I believe is what he is. And when he was going through his training, he had heard that this halo drop thing is what caused the Mothman to be seen. And so this guy claims that he actually met the guy that swooped over the car. So the way these halo drops work is it stands for high altitude, low open. And so they'll fly a plane, 30, 40, 50,000 feet up, and they'll actually do a paratroop jump out of that. And then when they get very close to the ground, that's when they'll open their chutes. And they use it to enter in behind enemy territory and go undetected. Well, at the time that the Mothman was sighted, this was something that nobody really knew about and that the U.S. government was just beginning to test. And one of the things that the government will actually do is they will take property that they own but haven't used in years and decades, and they will do their training and testing there. And so this Jeff guy, he said that that's exactly what they were doing in the area. And he went on to point out that the way that they do these drops is that on the front of the soldier, they'll use a glow-in-the-dark paint or a luminescent paint. They'll use 2 white dots in the front and 2 red dots in the back. And that way you can tell the people below you which direction they're moving in. Excuse me. And so he said that he met the guy. He had gotten off course, and he saw this car coming, and he couldn't avoid it. And so he actually swooped over the car. And as soon as he landed, he had to make contact with base and say, I was compromised, I was sighted, and they came out and picked him up. And at the time, they didn't have the shaped parachutes like we have now. And so that's one of the things they were testing. And so it would look like 2 huge wings spread out over this guy's back. And he would have 2 large red spots on his back. And so as he swooped over the car, they would have saw those spots, and those would have been the eyes. And so this guy, he claims to have actually talked to the guy that swooped the car. Um, there are records of this happening, and so that feeds directly into the Men in Black. So as soon as this happened, the government needed to get a feel for what was going on in this town. And so they sent in investigators. And anytime you see these investigators or these people from the government, they're very stoic. They're trained to be that way. And so that's what they do. They come in, they checked, and they harassed the local newspaper and told them, don't run any more stories, which is exactly what the government would want. They would want as little information and as little attention as possible on this area. And the reason why is because the Russians were looking for things like this to try to determine what we were doing. And so to me, that's a pretty good explanation.
It's definitely an interesting thing, and it, checks all the boxes for sure. Um, but I was, as I was reading more into it, that doesn't necessarily explain every Mothman sighting, which is the weird part of that. Specifically, the sighting I'm thinking of with the doesn't explain it all is the original first sighting, the one with the men in the graveyard that were digging a grave. And the reason I don't think that explains that one is it was in the daytime. So they should be able to figure out that that's a dude with a parachute and not a big bird.
Right.
If that makes sense. But
Well, to me,
what,
a lot of those things going together, you'd have maybe they saw the sandhill crane, and then the next day.
that was about to be my exact thought, was it could be a combination of different explanations that are sort of getting lumped together, and that would sort of explain some of the variation in the Mothman sightings. Not every sighting sort of matches up, if that makes sense. Uh,
Yeah.
but that would, if it was two or three different things that are being lumped together as the Mothman, then that does explain that sort of variation. And I think when you're looking at that point, you're probably getting pretty close to what's actually going on.
Yeah. Now, I know that this opinion is very, very unpopular amongst researchers. Um, to me, I really like it because it kind of frees up Mothman. I don't have to research Mothman anymore. We've got pretty good evidence. And, the same thing is I'll hear people say, well, that doesn't count. That guy's not really, an eyewitness. He talked to a friend of a friend of a friend. But, it's all hearsay anyway. You know,
Right.
it ends up being whose witness is more credible. And to me, the special forces guy that talked to the individual that actually did this seems to be the more credible of the group.
And in all reality, when you look at it, my way of looking at paranormal and stuff like that is, if you're looking at hearsay and you've got somebody that's saying, their opinion is there's a, you know, Mothman with 15-foot wingspan, glowing red eyes that nobody has any proof of, and somebody else is offering an explanation of something that legitimately makes sense and that there is some record of, I'm going to go with the one that at least has a record of it. There's no evidence that there was actually a Mothman there other than we saw this thing. And if this thing has an explanation other than the Mothman, I'm going to tend to lean towards that other explanation.
Yeah, it's that skeptical mindset. You can be a believer in the paranormal, but you, like anything else, you expect evidence from
Right.
it, you know.
And that's
And
sort of where I fall. But in this case, there's what I consider to be a fairly credible or a fairly worthwhile amount of evidence to
yeah,
support not Mothman.
and the other thing too, for anybody that wants to keep the mystery open, because that's what everybody really wants with a lot of this stuff is to really keep a mystery open. This only explains the sightings there in Point Pleasant during
That
that small
that
period of
was going to
time.
be the next point.
So, what's going on in Chicago where people keep seeing a winged humanoid? I know a lot of the flying humanoid phenomenon is extremely popular right now, and it's very popular down in Mexico. There's a lot of sightings and a lot of videos, and most of the videos I've seen are balloons. Believe it or not, of all the things, it's a tradition to release huge bundles of balloons at certain occasions, and so you'll see these things in the sky flying around, and uh, you can't describe what it is, and so a lot of people will go ahead and say flying humanoid, but that doesn't explain uh, a lot of the different like stuff going on in Chicago. People seeing stuff like that. Even the guy we interviewed, John Ford, he saw a flying humanoid, and we can guess at what he saw, but realistically, we don't know.
Right. And I will say with the Chicago thing, something that may be playing into that, again, it could be multiple explanations sort of going in together, is, with the sort of biology background that I have, one of the things that I've come to be aware of is an interesting phenomenon where a lot of places there are hawks and birds of prey specifically that are losing their habitat, which is basically cliff lines. And what researchers are finding is these birds of prey are starting to migrate into cities, where they haven't been before, but you've got all these skyscrapers, and, a lot of people normally means a lot of rodents as well. So our skyscrapers and our sort of larger cities are becoming a new habitat for birds of prey where they really haven't been before. So there's definitely the possibility that some of what is being seen in Chicago or some of the larger cities across, the world are actually just birds that are being misidentified by people who have never seen that bird in that area before. So that's definitely something to keep in mind if you're, looking at a video or something that, birds of prey are sort of beginning to move into cities. And I say beginning, they've been doing it for probably a decade or maybe even two now. So they're not really new, but it's new enough that people may not be, accustomed to it necessarily. So,
Yeah, a lot of times people just don't look up.
yeah,
It's one of those things. You got man-made cliffs, and I've seen it. When I lived in Knoxville, which is not the largest city ever, but um, I used to have in the area that I lived, there was a lot of red-tailed hawks, and there was a lot of great horned owls in the city of Knoxville. I used to call in the owls with my hands. I'd do my owl noises, and I could bring the owls into my apartment. You know, and I remember the first night that I did it was out in the front, and there was a guy that was absolutely amazed that I was able to call an owl in.
yeah. Well, and I mean, this is something that you and I have both experienced, over time. And this is with, people that are around us and sort of used to us. We'll say, "Hey, look at that bird over there," and their first instinct is to look for a bird on the ground, even though a bird spends 90% of its time, up above us somewhere. Their first instinct is to look at ground level. So even when you're looking for something that flies, people's instinct is to look at the ground for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's just human nature. Most of
Yeah.
the stuff we're looking for is not up.
All right. Well, you got anything else you want to throw in on Mothman or strange news for this episode?
Nothing else other than don't beat us up too bad if we stepped on your toes with this Mothman explanation. Um, I think that as paranormal researchers, if you're in this field and you always hear there's standard things that paranormal researchers say is people aren't considering all avenues, and the other one is the problem with the scientific community is they're not getting out and looking for these things. And the truth is that the scientific community is getting out and looking for these things. You got botanists and biologists that are deep in forests all the time, And just because they're not specifically there looking for Bigfoot doesn't mean that they would write off a Bigfoot if they found it. And
Yeah, and
it's the same
I
thing.
think your best example of that is his name just left my mind. Dr. Jeff Meldrum.
Meldrum, yes.
Yeah, Meldrum is I guess I don't really want to use the word normal biologist, but I mean that's what he is. He's got his PhD. He went out on a research trip, completely on something not related to finding Bigfoot, and he found a track that sort of set him on the path that he's on. Or at least that's my understanding of the situation. I'm not super familiar with his work, um, but I mean it's my understanding that his initial track that he found that sent him down this path, it wasn't like he was out in the woods looking for Bigfoot. He was
Yeah,
out doing normal research and just happened to find it.
yeah, and it's one of those things when you can find an answer to something, that checks all the boxes. To me, you kind of need to back up off that thing and maybe look at some other things. I know that we on the paranormal research side, we tend to do some of the stuff that we say the scientists are doing, such as you need to consider all explanations. Well, here's an explanation that you really need to consider because it checks every box that you need to check for it. And yet I see more and more people write it off. You can go on forums all day long and just see people, bashing Soldier of Fortune magazine. And I think a lot of it has to do with a belief system. People want to believe that this Mothman thing is something paranormal, and here's evidence showing that it's not. And so first off, it hits them in a core somewhere because they've invested so much time into it.
Right.
Again, I mean, I did a lot of research on the Mothman when I was younger, and so when I first heard this one, I was like, "There's no way," because I want it to be something, you know, maybe interdimensional or something spiritual or something like maybe a cryptid. And then in the end, there's a good chance that it's not. And so that's the case with a lot of the paranormal stuff.
Absolutely. That's something that I think we definitely take pride in, I guess is the best way to put it, of, considering that, yes, we would like something to be paranormal or, unexplainable. But if there's a pretty logical explanation, we're probably going to go with that as opposed to, something that doesn't have a body of evidence behind it.
Right.
So, I guess that brings us to the end of another episode.
Yeah, sounds like it. So
Uh, as always, I'd like to encourage anybody listening to this, like and subscribe. Let us know what you think. If you've got anything you want to hear us talk about, anything you've got going on that we could come out and investigate once this quarantine ends, or if we can investigate it from 6 foot away or whatever it is we've got to do, we'll definitely try to figure it out. Hopefully, we've been talking back and forth about some equipment that we're thinking about buying that we're hoping to get a chance to buy that will improve our ability to do some of this research. So that's definitely going to be exciting,
yeah, it'll definitely help us at least collect more evidence.
for sure. And this one I've not really said yet in any of the episodes, but definitely share us. If you've got friends or somebody that's interested in paranormal or strange stuff, share us around, and the more people we get listen to us that can give us ideas, the more you all are going to get new content that's not just us talking about Mothman or Bigfoot or whatever it is. We can get out and get some actual research done.
Yeah, to me the best shows are the ones where we do interviews and talk to people like that. Granted, we've not done a whole lot of those, but
No.
I love to hear all the stories. I mean, that's kind of what we started out doing anyways, talking about the stories. I love to hear the personal experiences. And it's one of those things that I found that even the most outlandish story, there's so much belief in it that you see people, if it something that really happened to them, and it doesn't matter how crazy it is, you can just see how much belief they have in it, how much sincerity they have in it. And I mean, I've dealt with my share of hoaxers, and the typically someone that's trying to hoax you or trying to tell you a story that's not real. There's no sincerity there. You can kind of tell that they're kind of flying by the seat of their pants. You'll start asking them questions, and they can't give you answers. But I've had people tell me crazy stories about things, and just be so passionate about what they've heard, and you can't help but believe them because of how much passion they're putting into telling you the story.
Sure.
One of my favorite ones, the guy that said that the Bigfoot woke him up because he was snoring. Hands
Yeah.
down, it's one of my favorite stories of all time. And I wish everybody could have seen this dude, because he was very adamant about what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, that story, it just sounds like the crazy. Who gets woken up by a Bigfoot covering their mouth up? It
Those are
just
snoring.
sounds
Yeah.
so crazy. But
Who?
if you were to actually talk to this guy, you would have seen that he obviously wasn't hoaxing this thing. He wasn't lying about it.
How many people have to throw Dogman out their trailer window?
Yeah, true, exactly. You're going to get in a fight with a 5 foot or 6 foot tall walking dog. I mean, but
Yeah.
the dude was straightforward with it.
Yeah. I mean, that's you know, I think you've said this before, and you put it really uh, really well. The more you're around people in the Bigfoot community, the less you want to believe in it, and then something happens that pulls you back in.
Exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
you talk to a guy who Bigfoot reached in and covered his mouth because he was snoring, and you're like, who makes that up? Like how? And like you said, he was very sincere about it. wasn't like he was faking it at all. You know, and you know, whatever, man. It's just weird. It's hard
Yeah.
to think about.
Yeah. Well, you know what else is weird? This is something you'll hear people talk about with paranormal stuff. The more you're around it, the more you see it.
Yeah,
And it's not one of those things where you're necessarily looking for it. Um, yeah, it's just a weird thing to be into. Actually, I always hear people say, you shouldn't get in the paranormal because it's dangerous and that stuff will follow you home. And in a way, that's true. But, in a way, it's not. I mean, I'm not ever worried about a demon lashing onto me and following me home, um, because, yeah, all the spirituality I have in it. But another thing is I don't go out looking for demons, and you see people do that.
yeah.
So,
Well,
all right.
guys, appreciate y'all listening. Like I said, like and subscribe. Check us out on Facebook, and we'll see you next week or next time.
Yeah, y'all take it easy.